Welcome to another episode of Four Guys Talking About AI. We got half the crew today. We got two of us. Hey, Greg, how are you?
Hey, Andy, I'm good.
Good. Neil and John couldn't make it today, but your fearless leaders are here. So,
Yeah.
uh,
So it'll be half as long. It'll be half as long today.
we'll say every other word. So, a bunch of exciting things happened this week. I want to just unpack it for you here. This week, we're diving into how AI is reshaping everything from shopping to browsers to billion-dollar valuations. First up, Walmart teams up with OpenAI to create the first AI shopping experience with Walmart where you can buy directly inside ChatGPT. No website, no checkout page, just conversion. So, pretty cool experience there. We'll talk about that. Then OpenAI is positioning itself as the new operating system for the internet with its Atlas browser, app integrations, wearables are on the way, and experts warn that Atlas, their browser, could open up security risks. So we'll talk a little bit about where we are in this moment in time and some cool things about it and some risks as well. And then next, responsive.io created a new report showing how B2B buyers are relying on AI to create self-service research, often helping them decide on which vendors to go with and how their buyers are using AI in that kind of instance. And then finally, the AI boom keeps breaking records. Nvidia hit $5 trillion in valuation this week. Apple and Google are over $4 trillion each. Microsoft announced a 27% stake in OpenAI that can make it the next $1 trillion IPO. So let's get into it. Let's start talking about some of these topics. Greg, let's talk about the Walmart deal with OpenAI, creating the first AI shopping experience on Walmart, and what that means for users and also for Walmart.
That's a big deal. I think a few weeks ago, OpenAI announced what they're calling instant checkout, which is the ability to buy something on ChatGPT for which ChatGPT will get a fee. Their initial partners were Etsy and Shopify, and now Walmart is joining. And from everything that I've seen and read, Walmart is very bullish on this and thinks that they're going to learn a lot probably through this partnership. And they have been very, very progressive, very AI forward in implementing AI in various capacities, with their associates and in their organization operationally. Walmart has a obviously huge inventory of products, and it's an it brings enormous brand credibility to this whole exercise, and I think it'll give consumers a lot of confidence that they'll be able to find products that they're interested in. Right now, you can search for any product you want or compare products, and it will refer you to third-party stores. So this is not necessarily going to expand the inventory that ChatGPT will talk to you about, but it gives you the ability to buy on ChatGPT a lot more stuff than was previously the case, and it creates a kind of a dilemma for Amazon. I mean, I think you can buy stuff through, you can do a search on ChatGPT. For example, this afternoon, my kids have stolen all the portable chargers we have, and so I need it's like we used to have just a ton of
I
them.
just saw that last night. I was going to do that today.
Yeah, we used to just have a ton of them, and we kept them in a kind of a bin in the kitchen, and slowly but surely, they all started disappearing, and now, like, just there was a couple of crappy ones left, and so I thought, "Oh, I've got a trip to a conference in Thailand coming up, and I need a portable charger," so I went on to ChatGPT, and I looked, what's the best rated portable charger that has these kind of specs, and, it gave me a bunch of options, and one of those was to go to I think I could click through to Amazon to buy it on Amazon. But Amazon needs to decide, well, are we gonna participate in this or not? And I can imagine that they're ambivalent about it because they would no longer own the customer experience. It would be them simply being a provider of, commodity inventory information. Maybe the pricing is more aggressive. But it's a big deal, and it gives the whole initiative, ChatGPT Instant Checkout, I think, a big boost. And we've really yet to see it kind of materialize, but I think it's going to be significant. It'll be quite a significant competitor in the market.
Yeah, and Walmart claimed that customers and members of Sam's Club will be able to shop directly inside ChatGPT. So just ask it what you need, and using its instant checkout feature in ChatGPT, you'll be able to buy these items without ever visiting a website. So that's the customer experience that you're talking about. And naturally, Amazon wants to own that customer experience. This disrupts that. It puts a challenge to it. I think if you're Walmart, you're kind of like, I'll take transactions from wherever they come. If they come from my website, the app, their affiliates, their stores, of course. I think Walmart has a different approach to this, and they're just moving product. Amazon is looking to, like you're saying, they're looking to also play some defense against their, what is it, like 50% of all e-commerce transactions happen on Amazon. So
Right.
they don't want that percentage to erode in any way, and they certainly don't want to hand over the reins to OpenAI so that OpenAI becomes the front door.
Right. I mean, I think that institutional investors might not be happy about that
Yeah.
if they see any metrics that indicate a loss of share or some erosion of volume on Amazon. And Amazon for a time had a whole bunch of stores. They had books, they had 4 Star, they had they were testing out a clothing store in LA, I believe. And so they had this initiative where they were building out a broader store network, physical footprint, and then they've rolled all that back. And I think the only stores they have, maybe and they have the Amazon Go, those still exist, but that's like a convenience store. The only stores that really exist anymore are the grocery stores, and I think there's a material difference between Walmart with its nationwide network of stores, Sam's Club, and Walmart stores, and this becomes another distribution channel for them that doesn't really diminish their brand in any way. Whereas I think there's more vulnerability for Amazon because it's pretty exclusively an e-commerce company, and if ChatGPT is delivering a better experience, then why am I going to go to Amazon? Maybe I'll buy something on Amazon through ChatGPT, but I'm not going to look at the Amazon ads anymore, and then I'm not going to read the reviews anymore, and that kind of thing. And Amazon just becomes a kind of a literal supplier of commodities.
Right. And I might not get Prime anymore if I can just get the same price.
Right.
Certainly, price comparison inside ChatGPT is going to be a big deal, right? You could just ask it, like, where can I find this item cheaper? So yeah, I totally agree with what you're saying there. It's going to be interesting to see how that all plays out. Um,
I mean, it could be that we have Walmart, Amazon, ChatGPT, and the losers in all of this are sort of some of the smaller retailers that have their own destination sites. We'll see. That's another possibility that Amazon won't suffer. It'll be these other third parties that do.
yeah, and that's a good point. OpenAI just announced a deal with Shopify a couple of weeks ago,
Right.
where if you have a Shopify store, you can get the same kind of experience, the same find your product on OpenAI on ChatGPT
Right.
and buy it right there. You wouldn't even ever need to go to the website.
As somebody who spent years and years and years focusing on kind of how the internet impacts local shopping and local businesses, what's really interesting to me is the possibility that we would start to get like local inventory in here. Google was battling against Amazon by trying to show a mix of e-commerce and sort of mostly big box inventory that was in stores, but they haven't gone all in on it. It's not, they haven't really promoted it. They haven't fully committed to it in my mind. And Shopify has a bunch of product in-store inventory data, and certainly Walmart does. And so it would be really interesting if I could not only look for e-commerce options, but I could try and figure out, well, who's selling this in my area? Where can I buy this in a physical store? I think that would be a very interesting addition to all of this. Now, of course, that would be problematic for the business model because they're getting a slice of a transaction, but it would be really interesting from a user experience perspective.
Yeah, I mean, in order for that to happen, you've got to have all these local businesses provide structured data and also real time inventory kind of a system, which you never know. I mean, OpenAI might just say, "Here you go. Here's your system in order to plug into our ecosystem and our 100 million, soon be more users.
But I mean, Walmart has that, and Shopify has a bunch of their stores do have kind of low in-store inventory information. And there are third-party companies, not as many as there used to be, but there are third-party companies like Last Mile Retail and Near Street in the UK, and there are probably some others. SAP was working on this for a while, where they can tap into the POS system, and they have ways to determine inventory, which is a separate conversation, but then they pump that out to different distribution points. So it's much more doable today than it was 5 or 10 years ago, I think.
Definitely. And I could also see, closing the loop on what you just mentioned there is that if that happens, and for companies that participate in this kind of inventory connection to ChatGPT, that ChatGPT would take the transaction and then you just go to the store and pick it up. And then,
Yeah, it's true. You could do that, right, and that
I
would
think
preserve their business model.
in that kind of a way.
Right.
Um,
That's the solution. You're right.
yeah.
Absolutely.
So really interesting. And this kind of lends itself to the next topic that we're going to talk about. So let's move into that, which is that really what OpenAI is trying to do here is create the new OS for the internet, the new operating system. And if you kind of zoom out, you see how they're doing this piece by piece. Certainly integrating shopping and leading with that as a use case is it's a very useful one. And it's also a great way to take this intent level of purchase and getting the answers to your questions right away, and then presenting, like qualifying that prospect in that moment, and then presenting them with purchase options, and the ability to do that really owns that whole funnel kind of experience. And what ChatGPT is doing now is that they've integrated apps. They've created the new Atlas browser, which we'll talk about here. Wearables and other hardware are soon to come. The Atlas browser, on a more immediate basis, they just released this a couple weeks ago, and they have this thing called the Omnibox, which allows you to connect a bunch of different apps into ChatGPT. Apps like Canva, Zillow, Coursera, Figma, Spotify, and others. You can just connect right into ChatGPT. What the Atlas browser does is it blends this input with web page content and using its own agent logic. You could easily see how an attacker could craft a URL or a web page snippet that bypasses standard safeguards and manipulates the browser to actually do things on other third-party websites that could compromise data or could create browser attacks or website attacks and hack those websites. And that's one cybersecurity concern. And then the other is at the user level, where users have their banking information or their credit card information.
Right.
And, you can imagine all of the security risks that happen with those kinds of things. So everybody's rushing into this, and it's interesting to see what's happening. It's moving very quickly, but when that happens, there's sometimes some broken glass that happens here, and certainly these are some risks going into this. Talk a little bit about the apps. We were talking about that earlier. Integrating apps into ChatGPT is really compelling.
They initially built a data kind of GPT store, right? Like an app store where people could create GPTs, right?
Yeah.
So and there were a whole bunch of companies that did that. And these would be more specialized than general ChatGPT or have access to other kinds of capabilities or data. And it didn't really work, right? I mean, some people use some of these things, but it didn't really break out, and lots of people weren't using these
And
these
the discovery
G-
process is really hard, right? How do I
right. It's
tell like one guy's GPT from the next, and why is it good?
right.
Yeah.
Right, and it's kinda like what happened with the Alexa skills, right? Alexa, the voice, Amazon voice
Yeah,
search
good
for this
analogy.
product.
Yeah.
Yeah, there were like 100,000 of these voice apps that developers had created and nobody used them, I mean, it was just a complete
Probably
fail.
gonna be the new
Um
frontier. right?
Right. So I think this is a reimagining of the GPT strategy on some level, but kind of more integrated, more directly integrated into ChatGPT, where there's a number of partners that launched. This was at their developer day a couple of weeks ago. They announced this. A number of partners have launched as of day one, and then there's a bunch of folks in line, DoorDash and Thumbtack and a whole bunch of different companies, some of which are focused on the local environment, some of which are e-commerce. But it's an interesting mix. And so the ones that launched on day one were Booking.com, Canva, Coursera, Expedia, and Figma, sort of a range of different, a couple of travel, some creative stuff, learning, and design. There's a couple of ways to get to this. You can either put the at sign into the search bar and it'll show you what's available, and you can select one and then do a search or do a lookup as you would, presumably on Canva or booking.com. And the other one is to just like if I'm looking for places to rent in Los Angeles, it'll suggest Zillow. Zillow is one of the first ones. I don't know why it's not showing up. It'll suggest Zillow. Do you want to run this search on Zillow? And then you get a version of the Zillow experience or a version of the booking.com experience within the ChatGPT environment. It's not identical, but it's branded and it's pretty close. So that's pretty interesting as a way to kind of upskill ChatGPT and provide a lot of the structured data and a lot of the value that these apps have built up over time very, very quickly to ChatGPT. I don't know how people are going to react to that, whether it's going to be widely used. Uh, I mean, there was a process where you had to connect the app. You had to go through a connection process initially that didn't always work. That was brief when it worked, but and then you could get access to the content. But they'll have to make it a little bit smoother than that, I think. But it's an interesting strategy, and it's a way to fill the gap between what ChatGPT can offer today and what something like Google can offer. Especially kind of in the local space where there's a lot of data advantages that Google has. So it's a pretty interesting strategy, and we'll see how it plays out.
Yeah, it's like this integrated app kind of experience, and you do have to log into any one of the services to be able to create this bridge between ChatGPT and that app. So Spotify or Figma or Zillow.
There's a little bit of friction there. It's not
Yeah,
terrible, but it's enough to dissuade some people, I think.
yeah,
Especially if it doesn't work. It didn't work a couple of times for me. Sometimes it did, and other times it didn't. So it was a little bit of a frustrating thing.
yeah. And before we started recording the show here, you mentioned something I thought was really interesting, which is it feels a little bit like what OpenAI is doing is creating this walled garden kind of experience, um, much like AOL did in the early days of the internet. Um,
Kind of.
I mean, it's open. You're connected to lots of other services, and of course, you can go browse the web and go elsewhere outside of the ChatGPT walls. However, by creating these bridges and these kind of connectors into all these other systems, uh, it really makes the brain of ChatGPT that much more powerful and interoperable. And if you look at this as the early days, right? Because we're all going to look back on this in 5, 10 years and go, I remember when they started doing that. Now it's fully evolved. What it seems to me is that these become fully integrated, full blown, kind of customer experiences that leverage uh, the functionality of, let's say, either Figma or anyone at Coursera, Spotify, what have you, creating that interoperability where it doesn't matter if you're in the app itself or if you're inside ChatGPT, it's a seamless kind of experience. And ultimately, I think what they want is the walls to go down, but first they have to kind of put them up to create these connectors so that you stay within their environment. I think what happens where all of this goes is that there becomes this wave. We'll see. I mean, we'll see if my little Nostradamus prediction here is right. Johnny Ive is a hardware software platform maker, right? He created the iPhone, the MacBook Pro, the iPad, right? uh, the iPod, very first when that came out. So he's now on ChatGPT's team, and you got to imagine that they're creating a network, a suite of interoperable devices that are going to be next gen AI first devices that will uh, incorporate some of the new advancements that Meta has with Meta glasses. That will have the ring, the Aura ring that has that kind of capability. We'll probably have a bunch of these devices that work together to create this AI first kind of experience that will really own the customer at that point at a new level, in a similar way that Apple owns the customer if you have an iPhone, and what that's like, and create a ton of benefits that will create this walled garden kind of experience on the one hand, but will become the OS, will become the platform for how you experience the internet and how you experience AI. It's certainly the vision, I think.
Yeah, I think they had a sort of a strategy document that was leaked. I don't remember the circumstances, but I saw some of it, and basically they're articulating a vision that's very consistent with what you just said, where they want to replace essentially everything that exists, browsers, search engines, everything that people are using today. They think people can get through ChatGPT tomorrow. I mean, it very much remains to be seen, but that very big, enormous global vision is, I think, what they're angling toward. And so all of these things are pieces of that: the shopping experience, the apps, the browser, that ultimately will roll up into something more seamless and unified. I mean, just on the point of the browser, which we talked about at the beginning, you know, there are a lot of AI browsers now. There's Dia, there's
GenSpar.
right. There's Edge with Copilot. There's of course Chrome with Gemini. There's Perplexities, Comet. There's Atlas, and there's probably several others that I'm not mentioning right now. I like the Atlas browser. A lot of people are sort of uh, dissing it because there's the security issue, which I think is a really valid point. But, there's a lot of cynicism about it. Is this just a way to get more data on users? There was a piece, the Daring Fireball blog, that was sort of, quoting from various individuals and saying, well, this has got to be some sort of data uh, grab, in the same way that Google developed Chrome in part to get more data on users and clickstream data and get more insight into user behavior. And so there's probably some truth to it, but I like it a lot. I think it's a better experience than the just basic ChatGPT experience as a browser tab, because you can go to websites in a way that you can't really in the normal ChatGPT. I mean, you can click through and get a website in your browser, but there's just a more friction there. But you can navigate directly to websites. It's a there's some subtle differences that I think are really interesting, and it's kind of a better version. The way I see this is a better version of the Mac client that they developed,
Mhm.
that I downloaded. It's a more complete version, and it makes ChatGPT sort of slightly better than the browser tab or the Mac client experience. So I'm using it a fair amount. I use it in tandem with Chrome or Safari. I don't use it as my exclusive browser or as my default browser, but I'm using it a lot, mostly to access ChatGPT. But in that process, I do go to third-party websites. If I do a search for, like, I just best HVAC repair, right? Heating and air conditioning. Um, on the ChatGPT browser, I get their kind of new and improved local experience, which has listings. If I'm in the Atlas browser, I have three choices. So I can get that experience through ChatGPT. I can click on the web search icon at the top of the page. I can click on the web search icon, and I'm getting like 10 blue links. It shows, I mean, unless this is all very fluid. So unless this has changed in the last 24 hours, I get the ChatGPT proprietary sort of local search experience. Then I can get this kind of 10 blue links if I click on the globe that says is web search. it'll show me 10 blue links that are not one to one what Google has. It may be some hybrid of Bing Places and Google, and but it's really interesting because it's comparable to what Google is delivering, but there are no ads, there are no like modules, no people also ask, none of these other sort of components of the Google search results page. And then there's a Google button in the upper right corner where I can click on that and it runs the same search on Google and I get the Google experience within Atlas. And I think that's really fascinating and interesting, and it makes me wonder what's going on with, is there some deal that has been worked out between the two companies? But I can create one query, I can get the ChatGPT version, I can get a web search version, which right now is this kind of 10 blue links experience, different from ChatGPT's proprietary version and different from Google's existing search results, although there's some overlap. And then I can get Google. I can get the full Google experience. It's
There is
really
another experience and dimension to this where like then you click on a website, you go to a website and you can chat about the website. You can ask
right. That's
questions
right.
from it and get
Right.
immediate
That's right.
answers. It takes a lot of the browsing and discovery out of it and just gives you answers quickly. And obviously that's what people want. There's a place for discovery and for browsing, but when you want answers to something, you want answers. You don't want to have to hunt and peck and figure out, all right, now I got to go to this website and browse it and find the right page. I guess it's under services, but maybe it's products. I don't know, and you got to go figure that out. And you click around the website. You don't have to do that anymore. You just go to a website and now you can just ask it a question about where can I find this? And it'll deep link you right into the website. And so, you know,
Right.
that's a very useful feature and certainly one that's going to be sticky. I can imagine Google just baking that right into Chrome in that upcoming
Oh,
release.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's there, and it's there. You get a comparable experience with Gemini. I mean, I'm not using Gemini in Chrome, even though Chrome is my default browser. I'm not really using Gemini, but it's the same kind of thing. It's the same kind of thing with Copilot. And it'll be interesting to see, what the differentiation is. I mean, I guess it'll just go to brand loyalty to some degree, but
Yeah.
like, I was playing with the Comet browser, but now that Atlas is out, I don't need to use Comet, even though I like Perplexity for many things. I can make Perplexity a tab on my Atlas browser and go access it that way. So, a year from now, 2 years from now, it'll be interesting to see how many of these guys are still around and how user behavior has been affected. Because as you were talking about the sort of chat with the website, that has implications obviously for web design, but I can ask, like on Amazon, I use their AI assistant Rufus a lot. I don't read reviews. I mean, I'll glance at the score, but I'll ask, like with these portable chargers, I'll ask, what are the main complaints about this product? And it just gives me very quickly a summary of what people have said, the pros and cons, and so I can make an assessment much quicker than if I had to sort of comb through the reviews and read a bunch of different reviews. And people are going to get used to that kind of summarization and
Sure.
seek it out. To your point.
Absolutely. So that's actually a good pivot point because this is not only shaping the consumer shopping behavior, but it's also shaping the B2B buying behavior. And this week, responsive.io created a white paper called Inside the B2B Buyer's Mind 2025. And the report uncovers how B2B buyer behavior has shifted, with buyers doing far more early research, leaning heavily on AI and self service, making up their minds well before speaking to vendors. All of this is informing the B2B buying process. These are significant purchases. And some of the key findings of this research are 90% of buyers conduct research before their first vendor contact. Nearly 2/3 use generative AI as much or more than standard search. 61% of buyers start with a preferred vendor in mind, and nearly half remain open to switching. So they go into this thinking, I pretty much have my mind made up, but, then half of them are like, actually, I'm open now. And the vendor's response to the RFP often becomes a tipping point in their decision process. AI adoption by vendors also matters. Over a third of the buyers say that a vendor's use of AI in the sales cycle makes them more likely to be considered. So, there's all this talk about AIO, like SEO for AI, or GEO, or whatever the new acronym becomes. Everybody's rushing to get their brand inside of the search results and in the conversation inside ChatGPT for this reason, because these are significant dollars that are moving in B2B, and that this is how it's impacting B2B buyers. Really, really interesting behavioral shift.
Yeah, and I mean, I think the B2B buying process has taken a cue from the consumer process where search used to be sort of the dominant tool that people use to determine who to work with and to get information about these different competitors. And so you would do a search on Google for, who's the best email uh, software program, or who's the best, how does company A compare to company B with CRM? And you would do all these sort of B2B searches. And I was involved when I was working at Overall, a German company that did listings, local listings, and reputation management. I was involved in a couple of internal software procurement, exercises, which were just nightmares. The whole process was just a nightmare for various reasons that I don't need to go into. Multiple people, and and you're all over the place, right? You're looking for information wherever you can find it. You're trying to find people who've had experience with the product, and you're looking at these, Capterra and G2, and you're doing Google searches, and you're looking at LinkedIn, and you're sending notes out to people in email, and it's just a painful and kind of inefficient process.
And highly
And
subjective as well, right?
well, exactly.
Yeah.
E exactly. I mean, a lot of people will just, you talk about the 61% go in with a company in mind. I mean, people have a lot of biases. There's a lot of inertia around what you're already doing, and that's a whole different conversation. Like, there's a clearly better tool, but we're not gonna change because we're so invested in this existing system that we have.
Yeah.
But there was another report too, a report from a company called Tenfold, which was about the marketer side of the equation, B2B marketers who are trying to reach these buyers that the responsive report talked about. And it came to similar, had similar findings, kind of a different angle here because it's the other side of the equation. And what they found was that um, AI is the second most common source of leads to these marketers, uh, after social media, which is the number one, and then ahead of search, email, and paid media. So it was social media, or people sort of word asking for word of mouth, and then AI. So both of these reports sort of validate that AI has become really central in the software B2B procurement process. And the reasons are probably pretty self-evident. You can collapse a lot of the work that has to be done, generating RFPs, evaluating RFPs, doing market research, comparing vendors. You can do a lot of that much more efficiently with AI, um, and then use the other channels to validate some of those findings. But it can get you from A to almost Z in, less than 50% of the time that it might have taken otherwise, with a lot more manual effort. And so it's no surprise that this is the case. And it's an interesting. We were talking before we started recording. It's an interesting contrast to what's going on the B2C side, where a lot of SEOs and people who initially were talking about, like, we've got to divert all our resources into optimization for AI, are now sort of saying, well, this is something to pay attention to, and it's important in some respects, but it's really way less important than doing what we've always been doing with Google optimization. And here you see kind of a stark difference where, marketers, software, SaaS companies essentially really need to take AI very seriously as a discovery tool, because they want to be part of the competitive set. They might not be in the competitive set if they're not discoverable, there, or if they don't have enough information that the AI tool can access to really give them a good showing versus, other companies are being considered.
A really interesting thing, and I'm curious to see if OpenAI comes out with this kind of a manifesto or some sort of like guideline as to how to actually do implement best practices for CEO, AEO, whatever you call it. But if they do, I could see how that could be a major disruptor in Google's ad traffic because, you know, if they're saying, hey, don't spend your money on, we'll send you a ton of traffic. I mean, they've got to obviously catch up in traffic and do this, but you can see down the road where OpenAI would do something like this to be disruptive to Google's ad business, where they said, instead of spending your, hundreds of billions of dollars here, invest in our infrastructure. We'll provide you with a roadmap to be able to get mentioned here, and maybe it's a completely new ad model that blends advertising with some best practices in SEO to be able to feed their engine, and it turns into a revenue driver for them, becomes disruptive for Google at the same time. uh, I could see how at some point they would want to command those dollars that way.
Yeah, there's definitely going to be ads. There's definitely going to be ads in ChatGPT,
Yeah.
and be interesting to see what they look like, and how complex or simple they are to provision, and so on and so forth. I mean, one of the things that's going on with Google, when Neil and I have done our surveys with consumers around AI usage versus search, we ask people, well, what do you like about AI? We give them a bunch of options, and my thesis going in was that the absence of ads was going to be a relatively prominent response. Like, I like that it's uncluttered with ads, and that turns out to be, there's a fair number of people in the mid 30s who like that, but that's not as significant as other things that they like about it: the conversational nature of the interaction, the ability to ask follow up questions. So, um, given that, I think we're not going to see we're going to see ads. We're not going to see defections probably in response to that. Um, on the other side, Google is uh, putting more and more and more ads into more places on the search results, and they're also kind of blurring the distinction between organic content and ads. I mean, they would argue that they're not doing this, but in reality, I think their strategy is to desensitize people to ads on the search results page, and direct people to click on certain kinds of things so that they can continue to drive ad revenue. And they're being very, very, very successful at it. I mean, they just had $100 million quarter for the first time, and you know, they have a lot to protect, and we'll see how that plays out.
Yeah, I could see how OpenAI, their ad model just becomes product placement more than it does become, ads on the right rail or something like that. I think I could see them just saying, we're just going to weave it right in. It's product placement. You want to show up in that result?
They'll have to declare it, right? You can't have the FTC rules prohibit somebody from just taking a payment and putting somebody in the regular search results without some labeling or other indicator that this is a paid slot. That's
Theoretically, I mean, OpenAI has a history of just, yeah, asking for forgiveness later.
Well,
And
right, everybody does. Everybody does.
they're gonna, if they're disrupting and they don't really care, and they kind of don't, obviously, because if you look at Sora and all of the intellectual
Right.
property violations that have happened
Right, right.
along the
That's
way,
right. You're right
obviously,
about that.
carrying went out the window a while ago. So, well, I guess
Yeah.
we'll see. And FTC,
Be damned.
that requires that the FTC actually knows what's going on in affairs, and people actually complain, and somebody does something about it, and by that time you're already years down the road. So, really,
In this environment, you might not have an FTC that tries to enforce anything.
there's that
So,
too. So we'll see. All right, so let's close up on some pretty wow numbers here. Valuations are in a major boom. Um, Nvidia now is a $5 trillion company. They just announced yesterday that a big deal with Uber, where they're going to be powering their AI is going to be powering Uber's self-driving cars. and what that might look like. We'll obviously be following up on that. But that was a big story yesterday, and they're just making move after move. Uh, Fascinating valuation, $5 trillion
They've
company.
they've they've dipped below 5 trillion today. They're at 4.93 trillion, but they'll hit it again.
Here we are. We're October 30th, 2025,
I mean,
and what's going to happen is that a year from now we're going to be like 5 trillion. That's all.
well,
It's
how long ago was it when we had the first $1 trillion companies? I mean,
yeah.
not
Apple
that
one
long.
the first. Yeah, it wasn't long ago. I remember like
And that was like 2 years, maybe. Maybe it was 2 years, maybe less.
yes, yeah, it's going at that speed. So, pretty incredible. Google and Microsoft and Amazon are obviously seeing huge benefits in their market capitalization due to their infrastructure solutions, right? Amazon has AWS, Microsoft with Azure, and Google Cloud. Those are all huge drivers. Google just did a big deal, in fact, this week with OpenAI that boosted their stock price up quite a bit this week. And Apple and Google now are over $4 trillion companies. Microsoft announced they own 27% of OpenAI. So, OpenAI is starting to talk about going public soon. And when they do, it'll likely be $1 trillion company right out of the gate. So, big boost for Microsoft. Nvidia also announced that they are a $100 billion investor in OpenAI about a month ago. So major lift in all of these valuations as we go, and all of these companies are breaking out because they're just doing massive deals with each other. So fascinating dynamic that's happening in all of this.
Well, so I discovered when Apple, which became the first, it wasn't the first company to reach $1 trillion valuation. That was a Chinese oil company in 2007, but it was the first US company to achieve this. And it was further back than I thought. It was August of 2018. So I thought it was only a couple years ago, but that's 7 years ago. But it's still kind
Well,
of
going
amazing.
from 1 trillion to 4 trillion in 7 years is quite a. I mean, it's always harder to go from 0 to 1 in any through any lens, but
Right.
going from 1 to 4 in 7 years, trillion, not billions, not hundreds of billions, but $1 trillion. That's a lot of zeros.
There's a lot of criticism of Tim Cook as being a kind of I mean, this sort of bending the knee to Trump is one area of criticism, but just not having the kind of inspired leadership that Steve Jobs provided, and not being as product oriented as Jobs was. But from a business standpoint, from an investor standpoint, he's you know wildly successful. I mean,
Yeah.
incredibly successful. And I shudder to think. I mean, at one point, I don't have any Apple stock, but at one point, I mean, I probably do in some mutual fund or something, but I don't have any standalone stock. But at one point, my wife had some Apple stock, which during the sort of dog days of that company, she sold. And had she not sold it, I probably wouldn't be talking to you right now. I'd be on my private island.
Right. Yeah. Well, I do find it
Um,
interesting. Last note on all of this, and kind of doubling back to the OpenAI discussion earlier, I find it really interesting that OpenAI is going hard after owning the conversation and becoming the assistant, the personal assistant, and being the operation
yeah.
system platform for the consumer and also for businesses, but really at the consumer level. And meanwhile, to your point, even though uh, Apple is doing great from an investor standpoint, they're really missing the mark of
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
what they could be doing in this moment to create real AI agents that are personal, that lock in that relationship with Apple. And it's a weakness of theirs right now. It's
Yeah, and
something
they're
that,
and they're totally aware of it. They're totally aware of it, and they keep losing people to Meta that, is paying these outrageous amounts of money to bring over AI technologists and experts. I don't think they're initially it might have been a blind spot for them, but they're clearly aware of it and they're trying to do stuff. And I think they're struggling to retain people. And I don't have any insight into the technical barriers that they face, but in theory, we're going to get a version of Siri coming up in Q1 or something that's going to be kind of ChatGPT like. But you're right. There's a lot of investors have been mollified for the moment, but long term they need to rethink the experience. I think there's one vision of the future where everything goes to a chat interface. They used to talk about sort of the search bar. Google conditioned people to expect to get access to information easily wherever you were, and that became the sort of standard user experience. And I think this is the successor to that, and we're going to see every company sort of simplifying access to information, either through a kind of a voice assistant use case, or just the ChatGPT conversational style.
Yeah.
Uh,
I mean, when the new Siri finally does come out, I hope their theme song is "That'll Be the Day," because
yeah.
maybe we can do it a little outro with that when they
Right.
announce.
Exactly.
All right, well,
Exactly.
cool. Well, good conversation today, Greg. Thank you so much. Thanks everybody for listening, and tune in next week, and we'll see you then. Thanks so much.
Okay. All right. Bye bye.
Bye.